Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Real Life Practice Podcast. I'm Teresa McCloy.
And I'm Lindsay Sturkey, and we are excited to welcome you into our conversation about what it means to practice our faith in our ordinary, everyday life. In each season of this podcast, we explore a different spiritual practice together that helps us connect with God and become more of who He has created us to be.
We love talking about spiritual growth, exploring life story, and discovering how to pay attention to God in the ordinary and the extraordinary moments of our days. And this season, we've been talking about the practice of retreat and how the invitation to get away, to create space and connect with God is so present in our lives. So, welcome to our conversation. Lindsay, I'm excited to talk again about this idea of retreat.
Absolutely. Yes, we've been talking a lot about the purpose of retreat and what it means to engage in that as a spiritual practice. We are excited to welcome a couple episodes ago, Gail Donahue and Joan Kelly talking about their guided retreats through their ministry of sacred. So if you missed that episode, check it out. That's a great resource for you. But
Yeah.
we really wanted to talk today about once you have set aside the time, we talked about kind of some of the logistics of planning and getting it on your calendar. So you've got it on your calendar, you get to the time, you're on retreat. Now what? What do you actually do with that time that you're on retreat? So we wanted to spend an episode talking about that a little bit.
I did all this pre work, so to speak. And now I've got the location picked out. I'm going somewhere. But what's the kind of expectation? So when I think about it, there's an internal part of you that's going on of like anticipation and expectation. And then there's the external of we're so wired to do something. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially the first time, few times you go on retreat, is to feel that I have a little bit of a plan. The more you practice the rhythms of retreat on a regular basis, the more you start to let go of so much of that plan. But I think if this is a new practice for you, having some handles around how you will spend the time could be helpful.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to hold that tension of having intentions of how you'll spend the time, having a loose structure and schedule of what your flow will look like. But you also don't want to get so overly planned and scheduled out that it feels like you're just checking boxes off a list of things to do. And
Mm.
so to kind of see like what is the flow, what would be most helpful for me, set up the time, but also to be open to it going in a different direction, to hold it loosely, and to be listening and responsive to how the Spirit of God leads you as you move through that time.
So it might be helpful. I mean, and we've talked about this several times, but I think it's good to hear again, or at least in this series, we've talked about it is how do you leave? So, how do you leave, even if you're just going for 6 or 8 hours, you're doing a day retreat. For myself, I have to think who are the people that need to know I'm off the grid? We are so tied to our phones and technology, email, those types of things, carry it in our hand with us everywhere we go, that to say, I'm not going to be available is an important release. And so, I have to tell the team that I'm not going to be available. I have to tell my husband, my daughter, usually my mother, some because they're elderly. And so I need to know. Even I start to think about things like letting my sister in law know I'm going to be gone in case my parents are trying to get a hold of me. So, what would be able to let you release into the day so that you can be open to a little bit more freedom? That's something I always notice when I go on retreat is the first hour, maybe 2 hours, feel a little bit like a detox of just I'm used to checking my phone or I'm used to listening to a podcast or we're so used to input that just be ready for that when whether like I said, it's a longer period, an overnight or even 6 to 8 hours away of like, this feels different. I should be doing something.
And I think noticing the feelings that come up during that time is an important part of the retreat experience. To know that that's normal to feel that distraction or feel pulled in different directions or feel that unsettledness of, I should be doing something, to
Mhm.
bring those into God's presence and notice what you observe there, because that's such a part of the experience. That it doesn't mean you're doing retreat wrong or that you're missing the point. That is part of the process. It's part of the experience.
And talking about that doing space, depending on your personality, this may be a harder thing for you than others. I actually, even as we're recording this, I'm not on a true retreat, but I am off site. I'm at a different location this afternoon, even after we get done. I'm going to spend some time quietly. I'm at a location where I can go for a walk and do some things. And I'm kind of unplugged while I'm here, other than we're recording this. One of the things I often do is write down 2 or 3 experiences I want to have while I'm on retreat. And I'm looking actually at what I wrote for here. I wrote down, I'd like to take a nap. I've been here yesterday. I'll be here all day today. I want to go for a hike. This is a beautiful place to walk the trails. I want to do some work with One Life Maps, a tool that we have and we talk about here on the podcast. I brought some maps with me. And what I specifically want to do is add to the My Life Story map. I usually pull it out once or twice a year and add some more of my story onto there. Now, you might be listening and thinking these sound like accomplishments that you're going to do, but they all connect to my spiritual life and how I meet God. The maps are a huge tool for me in that. When I'm on retreat, we'll take maps. Taking a nap is not a normal for me in my everyday, but if I think about it clearly, my personality leaves the retreat going, wow, you rested your body, you got out in nature and creation, and you worked, with the maps in a way that you wanted to. So those are just 3 things that I actually kind of wrote them down this time of like, man, if I could experience all 3 of these, I know what that means for me. You do that so differently. I mean, you might go, I want to take a great book with me that I want to dive into, or I'm going to journal. We've talked about journaling. I'm doing more journaling. So I've been doing journaling as well. But that's just sometimes the way I approach it.
I think that's a great example of having an intentional plan that is not overly structured. But when I come into this space, here are the things that I need to be able to settle into the time with God in a way that is restful, but that you have some clarity on what does this time look like and what do I actually need from this time. One thing I do sometimes when I go into retreat is I notice, is there a question I'm carrying right now in my life? And it might be a matter of discernment. It might be something that I'm grieving. It might be something that I'm feeling just in need of God's voice and presence. And I think when I carry that question in, I don't carry it with demanding God answer it or that something come out of the time, but I just notice this is a place in my life that I need to bring into God's presence. Even if it's just to know that He's in it with me, I don't always get answers from it, but I need to experience God in this specific area of my life. So that's something sometimes that I pay attention to coming into retreat is a question I'm carrying.
And I love that because many times those questions come up in our everyday, ordinary life. And they're like this fleeting, like little thing that goes blurb that goes through our head. And we don't have the longer contemplative open space to just kind of open our hands, open our hearts, and just be with something. And so when I talk about like, oh, I want to take a nap, I want to get out and walk in creation, it's because underneath there's something that I usually am feeling that God and I are going to spend some time around and without, and he's going to maybe spend time with me in both of those types of things. So it depends on your season. It depends on where you live when you're doing it. But I think anytime you can have some connection to nature as a part of the unstructured word that you said earlier, Lindsay, I think is so important too, because all of those things, having a hike, having a nap, working with the maps, I could say from 9 to 10, I'm going to do this. From 10 to 11, here's some intention that I have, but God might take it in a whole different direction. there might be a whole different outline time frame that he has for me, and I might do one thing I probably will not nap the entire time, but I might take a much longer walk than I intended or spend some time outdoors longer than I intended.
What helps me as I'm moving through the flow of my day is to pay attention to all 3 centers, right? Our mind, our emotions, our body. What is my body telling me? Do I need to walk? Do I need to sit still? Is my mind full and rushing? Would it be helpful to get some things down on paper, or do I need to just sit in the silence? What am I feeling? Do I need to give some space to just cry or to sit and feel grateful or, paying attention to all 3 spaces of myself helps me to know what do I actually need during this specific retreat time.
And the more that you practice any spiritual discipline, the more that you find your way in it, you will find your own way and what speaks to you. And you will kind of know, yeah, when I go, and you will anticipate the day that you have set out and you will learn. And I think this is the fun part about beginning to practice retreat. You will learn that you can carry that same thought, feelings into your everyday life. And you can go, wow, retreat means I have to go for 2 or 3 days and whatever. And you'll start to go, I can have a mini version. And you talked about this in an earlier episode of just taking a morning and doing the same thing. So don't hear this long planned out, day, 6, 8 hour overnight thing that may be what you need to experience in the beginning, but then you can take that same thing and practice it in shorter ways as it grows inside of you, as God opens that ability to disconnect easier and reconnect easier. I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned about retreat is how I can create that same space in smaller ways in my life.
Absolutely. Something I noticed when I did kind of my last day retreat was noticing this is always available for me. This practice of going on a walk, being in nature, taking that time to be with God, to be with myself, that it's always available to me. And it's like you said, we find ways to build that into our everyday routines. And it doesn't have to be a full day, it can be a 15-minute walk that gives me that similar experience that I
Yeah.
might have on retreat.
So practice it bigger, longer, so you can bring it into the small spaces of what you're doing. I think another thing that might be helpful as we kind of bring this full circle is how do I re-enter? So you have a plan for how am I going to go away and pick the location and do the disconnect with family. There's also a re-enter part, whether you've been gone for the day or, you turn the phone back on and all of a sudden ding, 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 ding. And, you see the text and you see the emails or the missed phone calls or whatever. Talk about that a little bit, Lindsay. What is that like?
Yes, because it can be jarring to come out of this time with God that feels so connected and peaceful and meaningful. And then sometimes when you re-enter, it feels like real life kind of smacks you in the face a little
Right.
bit. And so it can be jarring. And I think the biggest thing that's helpful is having the expectation that re-entry might feel difficult. And again, you can have that feeling of, man, well, that was a waste, or I did this wrong if I come back into my life and I don't have that same inner peaceful feeling. Part of the practice is coming back into our life, taking a deep breath, and knowing that God is still with us. God is still
Mhm.
present, even if externally things become more chaotic and filled with action. That is, again, part of the process. It's part of the practice. It's to be expected. You're not doing it wrong. I
No,
think
you're
that's
not.
such a helpful place to start.
And remember, especially for those closest to you, and I'm talking about those who might live in your home, they've been doing life while you stepped out of it for just a short period of time. I laugh now, and hopefully I'm older and wiser than I was 10 years ago or so. When I first started practicing retreat, I would go, and at that point, I was actually in a spiritual formation community. So I would go all the way to Chicago, 2 or 3 hour drive, have this wonderful spiritual experience, all of these things. drive the 3 hours home, which wasn't always a wonderful experience because of traffic. And so I felt like, well, I just had this and now I feel a little bit robbed of I can't carry that home with me. And then I'll be honest, I would walk in my home. At the time, there was other adults living there besides my husband too, and I would feel that jar of, like, crazy things, like, I'd look and there were dishes sitting on the counter or nobody had unloaded the dishwasher, and I just wanna warn you to not let that rob you of what you just encountered, because if not, then all this stuff overwhelms of, like, "This is why I can't go away. This is why I shouldn't do these
Yeah.
things," and we just lost all that experience that the Holy Spirit was guiding, and so just know that temptation of that is going to come sometimes with reentry. Maybe you go, "I'm not turning on my phone till tomorrow morning. I'm gonna greet my family first. I'm gonna do this first, then I'm gonna do that." And you pace that reentry rather than
Absolutely. I think that's so helpful is to consider what is my transition going to be. If you have a drive from wherever you were on retreat to home, maybe you listen to music, maybe you listen to a podcast, whatever is going to feel life giving. I feel like for myself, often I need something that, like music, that I can
Mm.
just kind of rest and relax into. I don't necessarily need a bunch of information or words coming into my mind. Just listening to music helps me kind of transition back in. If I did things like disconnect from email or social media, I'm probably not going to, as soon as my retreat's done, pick up my phone and get back on those things. I'm
Yeah.
going to give myself some time before I re engage with that. And I think when we look at coming back and re engaging with our people, is like you said, knowing that they've still been dealing with everyday life, especially if you've been out of town and you come back and they've been holding down the fort while you're gone, to practice a loving presence with them, understanding where they're at and where they're coming from. They have had a different experience than you have the last few days. And so just recognizing that and being present, I think is such a big important part of
Yeah,
that.
and I think it's a pre-conversation too, especially if you have kids at home that, the spouse is holding down for you while you're gone or whatever, to even have a little bit of like, "Okay, I plan to be home at 5. Why don't you go work out or do something?" Because we can have that expectation of, "I wanna come back and share with them my experience and do," and let's have a conversation before go. I'll just share just briefly too, my experience with where I'm at right now is I noticed as I drove over to this location, it's about a 3-hour drive, and I had 2 phone calls while I was driving over. Efficient and effective, like, okay, I can do that. And once I got here, I'm like, I wished I wouldn't have because going and leaving are part of the experience.
Yeah.
So when I arrived here yesterday to spend some time, yesterday was kind of my retreat day. I still had to shut down my brain more. I was still in work mode. And so I just would encourage you to protect the travel time if you're traveling, even if it's 30 minutes. Just don't go, oh, I've got like 4 more things to do before I turn off my phone or whatever. My experience was not as rich as it could have been in the beginning couple of hours because I hadn't let my heart be prepared in a way that it could have. And that gift of that drive time was actually a gift, right? The car time was part of the experience. So it's just fresh in my mind from yesterday of like, kind of wished I hadn't done it that way. I'm not going to beat myself up about it because I'm going to go on more retreats and I'm going to do more things. But these are the things you learn as you experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's where even reentry, noticing what felt life-giving and what felt life-draining,
Mm.
and naming, "Okay, next time I go on retreat, here's
Yep.
something I might do differently." And like you said, it's not to critique yourself or beat yourself up, it's just to notice, "How can I set myself up well next time?" Because the more you do it, the more you learn what is gonna be most helpful for me.
But not going to that, well, I'm never doing that again because this is what happens.
Yeah.
That's the lie we can tell ourselves when remembering the experience that you had. And let's say something about this before we wrap this up, and we might talk about this more on the next episode, but not judging the experience.
Mm.
as good or bad. So it's kind of a whole nother rabbit trail we could go down. But I think I've heard people talk about this and it wasn't like that for me, kind of story that we can tell ourselves.
That's so important because there's so much to just trusting that we created the space and that that's enough.
Hmm.
And that God is moving in us even if we can't name it or see it. So we don't have to be able to say, I got something out of it, or it was good or bad. It simply is.
Hmm.
And that's enough.
Many times we won't recognize what it was until days, weeks, maybe even months later of like, wow, I remember God and I having this moment together, or I remember the Holy Spirit speaking in me, and you may not even recognize it at that moment. So letting go of the judgment that we can have around it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So plan, but don't overplan.
Yes.
Think through some things, but don't overthink. I know that sounds very vague, but we just continue to encourage you. And if you need that guided, go back and listen to a couple episodes earlier around this idea of retreat. It's not wrong to have guided experience. It's not wrong to even have a conversation with a spiritual director or a formation coach or whatever during your retreat time. This is not necessarily like I've got to be in silence and solitude, right?
And I think if you are planning a retreat and you're wondering how to structure the time to keep it simple, bring a journal, maybe your Bible, lots of listening and silence, but also maybe spend some time writing. You can pray. I find talking out loud to God, especially if you're out in nature and there's no one around, pray out loud, see how that feels. I often alternate between walking and sitting. So kind of see what feels good to you, but don't feel like you have to have an elaborate plan. Keep it as
Mhm.
simple as possible, but kind of pay attention to what elements feel helpful to you.
As we wrap up today's episode, we have some resources that you could download to talk more about retreat. You could also find us in a couple of different spots, not only here on the podcast, but we now have these episodes on YouTube if you want to experience it in that way. The Real Life Process community is a place where people similar to you are showing up and on the journey together. And sometimes you may feel, how are others experiencing this? What are they doing? So that might be a place that you want to connect as well.
You can find all of that in the show notes, ways to get connected with us. Like Teresa said, in our circle community, we also have a membership that explores more of these practices together. We're about to start a new book together this month called Journey of the Soul that talks about stages of faith. So check out the show notes for all those resources. We are here to support you as you are learning to walk with God in your everyday life. And so thanks for listening. We have one more episode in this series about retreat. So we hope that you will join us next time as we continue to listen to Jesus' invitation to learn the unforced rhythms of grace in our everyday, ordinary life. Thanks for listening.